percent of everything.
Prison for skipping bail. He skipped bail to avoid extradition to Sweden on sexual assault allegations. Allegations, let me stress, not charges. Allegations which he denies. He fled the authorities in order to get that political asylum, which he got in the heart of London, in Knightsbridge, in the Embassy of Ecuador. Now, he was not avoiding facing justice. He was avoiding facing the likely onward extradition from Sweden to the United States. People like Ray McGovern of the CIA have said very clearly that not only is he within his rights to claim political asylum, he's in his right mind. Sweden is a fake neutral country, according to Ray McGovern. It continually extradites through extraordinary rendition people that the United States would like to welcome home.
Well, they should have come to him anyway, the Swedish authorities, not him too. That's not how. You don't go to a police station and the police come to you. You're under no obligation to go anywhere. So it's a no-brainer.
Now, what's happened is that the media have portrayed things very differently, but I'm going to get onto that later. So you've heard this narrative of events I've given you. Now I want you to make up your own minds what you think is worth doing. Okay? I want to talk about Julian Assange's character, what kind of person he is. I'll talk about the way the media have portrayed this situation, and I'll talk about the way the state have persecuted Julian Assange. So, first of all, let's start with Julian Assange. At the helm of WikiLeaks, that man has helped to reveal some very important information about how the world really works. He's revealed the US genocidal war against Iraq, the nature of that brutality. He's revealed Hillary Clinton's indirect support for ISIS, and he's revealed the British government's continuing abuse of the Chagos Islanders in not letting them return back to their homes. These are three of many, many, many examples of ways in which Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have helped us to understand the world and the way it really works and the way the West really works. But the media don't give him that credit. The media do not give Julian Assange the credit he deserves. In fact, the mainstream media do the very opposite. The mainstream media insult him personally, they mock him, and they make up outright falsehoods. For example, The Guardian published an article saying that Julian Assange, while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, received a visit from Mike Pompeo, a member of Trump's cabinet. There is absolutely no evidence that this happened. There is absolutely no evidence that this happened. This is a fabrication. But the worst thing about this is that it's self-defeating. The free press needs people like Julian Assange. So when they attack people like Julian Assange, they shoot themselves in the foot. I would say most egregiously, though, most worryingly, most shamefully, The Guardian have not given us crucial facts about Julian Assange's story. For example, this man on the bicycle here wearing the hat, he has said a very crucial point that the media have left out, invariably left out of their narratives. This man was telling us that Julian Assange, while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, repeatedly said to the authorities from Sweden, if there's allegations of rape towards me, if there's allegations of sexual assault, why don't you come and ask me questions about that? I am here in the Ecuadorian embassy in Knightsbridge in London, right by Harrods, 15-minute walk away from here. I am right here, and I'm not going anywhere. So why don't you come and ask me questions? And if you can't be bothered to get on a plane to come to England, we can do it over Skype. This is what Julian Assange said to the authorities in Sweden, and this is what his legal team said. Sweden said, no, you have to come here. You have to come to Sweden. Julian Assange said, okay, I'll go to Sweden. But give me just the verbal reassurance that you will not extradite me to the United States. Give me that reassurance you will not give me extraordinary rendition to the United States, where the government wants to give me the little punishment of life imprisonment for revealing Western war crimes. Sweden failed to do that. Sweden failed to promise him that they would not extradite him to the United States, and so he stayed there in the embassy of Ecuador. As the organization Women Against Rape said very clearly, the allegations of rape are being used as a smokescreen to distract the members of the public while they suppress Julian Assange, while they suppress his rights. It's to demonize him, it's to smear him. So that's what the media have been doing. By leaving out that important fact, by creating outright fabrications, they have, and by insulting him personally, they are undermining their own basis for existence. They are undermining the free press. They are shooting themselves in the foot. Now that's the media. What about the government? It's not much better. And on this, the media have not held the government to account. Our Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, said that Julian Assange is not above the law. Julian Assange is not a hero. I will leave it up to you to decide whether Julian Assange is not a hero. That's up to you. But I will say that not only is Julian Assange respecting the law, Jeremy Hunt's own government is not above the law. That's what I would say to Jeremy Hunt. Your government is not above the law. The United Nations put out a legal ruling that the United Kingdom was arbitrarily detaining Julian Assange. Arbitrarily detaining. Holding him without charge. What's more, they were not giving him the medical attention that he needed while he was in the embassy of Ecuador. They were not giving him treatment for his bad shoulder. They were not giving him treatment for his depression, and they were not giving him treatment for his teeth. So the United Nations said that Britain was breaking international law by keeping Julian Assange in the embassy without charge. They also said that Julian Assange deserves safe passage out of England, and he deserves compensation, financial compensation for his mistreatment. So I say to Jeremy Hunt, why don't you and your government obey the law? Why don't you obey the United Nations ruling that Julian Assange is being arbitrarily detained and deserves safe passage and deserves compensation? That's what I would say to Jeremy Hunt. So I've spoken about Julian Assange, the man. I've spoken to you about the way he's being treated in the media, and now the way he's being treated by the government of this country. You have the facts before you. You have my personal interpretation of the facts. I'll answer a very common attack on Julian Assange. People say, well, Julian Assange skipped bail, and the law is the law, after all. So he should get some punishment for that. He should at least have the 15 weeks in prison in the United Kingdom for skipping bail. To that I would say no, that's not fair. When he was under house arrest in the UK, he already received about a year in detainment. If I remember correctly, it was 1 year he received under house arrest. That should be more than enough punishment. What's more, he skipped bail on house arrest that was given to him because of a European arrest warrant put out by Sweden. That European arrest warrant fell away in 2017. So when that arrest warrant fell away, why did the Metropolitan Police still have the order from the United Kingdom's government to try and arrest him? Why is that? Why is it that when the legal basis for someone having house arrest has fallen away, you still want to arrest that man? Why? The law is the law after all, right? So the UK government was not obeying its own laws. You're not supposed to have an arrest warrant out for someone when that arrest warrant has dropped, or the basis for that arrest warrant has dropped. That doesn't make any sense. It's back to front. And it's no surprise, though, that the law became back to front, that the law became Alice in Wonderland, when you have a judge who's married to an MI6 agent ruling on that case. That's right. Arbeth, no, she was married to an MI6 agent. So I'm not too surprised that this has happened, to be honest with you. Now, I'll finish by saying Julian Assange is someone to be fought for. He's not somebody to be denounced. He's someone that we should be angry about in connection to his bad treatment. He's a hero, in my opinion. In my humble opinion, he really is a hero. And we should support him. We should try and at least read both sides of the story. Yes, read The Guardian, read The Telegraph, if you will. If that's what you want to do. But what I'm trying to say here is, why not read the other side of the story as well? That's what I think we should all do. Try and get both sides of the story. Then we will have the material of self-defense. Then we will have the ability to intellectually defend ourselves against the shadows of the secret state that trespass on our human rights. Then we will have the ability to stop those shadows. Those shadows that, when brought into the light, evaporate. Thank you very much. Cheers. So I've finished, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to hear them.
About Julian Assange.
That's right, I was talking about Julian Assange.
His arrest warrant was for breach of bail conditions.
That's right, yeah.
And warrants don't. So if you murder someone, there's no, like, if you're wanted for police work, that doesn't run out. It's not like, well, they didn't catch him the first week, so you just let him go. Like, warrants can continue for a very, very long time until such time as they're decreed not. His arrest was for breaching bail conditions and failing to appear in court. And he still hadn't done those when he was kicked out of the embassy. That's why he was arrested, because he still hadn't reported to police. He might not even be charged with them, but he still failed to report to police.
So did all of you hear what this man just said? Did anyone not hear that? So, correct me if I'm wrong, but this man just said, well, Julian Assange has been arrested, and it's fair enough that he's arrested, because when somebody breaches bail, the arrest warrant can go on for a long time, and that should be honoured and upheld.
I gave the example of, hypothetically, like if someone were to murder someone, and then you don't catch them the first 2 weeks, you don't go, well, that's done and dusted, you can't arrest them anymore for it, because they might just disappear for a period of time. Like the arrest warrants go on until the person is back.
Incidentally, can I point out something before I continue to answer this question? There are people who have murdered their wives who have received less harsh treatment than Julian Assange. There are people where they've been charged, not accused, but charged with doing that. And they've received house arrest treatment, which is much better than what Julian Assange has gone through. I just point that out to you. That's quite interesting. But that's a digression. What you've just said there, it's true. If the arrest warrant hadn't run out. But it ran out in 2017. And in fact, I ask you to look back at what the United Nations said. In the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detainment's legal report on this matter, they tell Britain that the legal basis for your arrest warrant has run out. Sweden's arrest warrant through Europe, the European Union, has fallen away. It fell away for a number of reasons. It had run out its statute of limitations, and there was no evidence. And there were some questions being raised in the legal community in Sweden that Marian Nye, the prosecutor, might have been obstructing justice by refusing to go to Britain to ask Julian Assange questions in connection to the case. So again, I'm just going to restate the refutation I gave not more than 5 minutes ago, that it makes no sense to have an arrest warrant out for someone on the basis that there's an arrest warrant sent out for them by another country, then to have them legally breach their bail in order to claim political asylum. So they're breaching their bail for a very good reason. And in fact, that doesn't even count as breaching bail. Let's go back to something that WikiLeaks have said. To say that Julian Assange breached bail, to say that he skipped the conditions of his house arrest, is actually defamatory. It's not true. Why is that? You might be wondering. Well, actually, when you skip bail for a good reason, it doesn't count as skipping bail. Julian Assange had a very good reason to skip bail.
Is it a legal reason?
It was a legal reason. He had every reason to believe that the extradition threat to Sweden was politically motivated. Not motivated by concern for women's rights, not motivated by concern for rape victims, or supposed rape victims. No, it was politically motivated. The hegemon of this planet doesn't like to be revealed as a hegemon. And so when someone like Julian Assange stands up to that hegemon, it gets upset. And it puts pressure on Australia, and on Britain, and on Ecuador, and on Sweden to cooperate in isolating this threat and absorbing it into the prison system, which is what they want to do. Obama wanted to do that, and so did Trump. And so does Trump, I should say. They want to take Julian Assange, put him in a dark place for a very long time. That's what you get for revealing the truth about Western war crimes. You can speak all you want about corruption in Kenya, you can criticize Russia all you want, but if you say anything about Britain, or if you say anything about Britain's master, the United States of America, you will get in trouble. Let that be a warning to all of you. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to freeze journalism. Have I satisfyingly answered your question?
It was more a counterpoint, but on that, if you're going, there are defences for almost every crime. There is a defence, and if you're saying that he had that reason, but you don't get to decide legally whether or not your own defence works. Otherwise, no one would ever be charged. You would then have to go in front of somebody and argue that defence. His failure to do that is why he was then arrested, because he breached his bail and did not go to the police to actually defend himself. He just hid in the Ecuadorian embassy. That's why he was arrested.
When the Swedish authorities put out the European arrest warrant in connection to the rape allegations, let me stress, allegations, not charges, allegations that Julian Assange denies. When Sweden put out when Sweden put out that European arrest warrant, Julian Assange was in England and he went to a police station. I believe it was on the Old Kent Road. He went to the police station and he turned himself in. He put himself in the hands of the police. He said, I've just had this allegation put out. I'm here to answer any questions. They put him under house arrest. And when it became clear to Julian Assange that this was politically motivated and it was not motivated by genuine concern for the rights of those two women, then Julian Assange fled to the Ecuadorian embassy and successfully claimed the legal right to political asylum. According to Daniel Ellsberg, the famous whistleblower who revealed to us the Pentagon Papers, showing us the extent of American violence in Vietnam, all the way back in the 1960s and the 1970s. According to Daniel Ellsberg, Julian Assange is well within his right, and political asylum was built for people like Julian Assange. It was made for people like Daniel Ellsberg. It was made for people like Edward Snowden. Let's not forget that. That's the whole point of political asylum. To allow these people who challenge the state to have some protection. So that's what I'd say to you. Are there any other questions? I know there was a question over here. I'd be very happy to answer it. Was it you? Sorry, madam.
Assange isn't a journalist. He just had access to thousands of documents. Spewed them out. He didn't say, okay, this is a good essence of a good argument, and then the journalists real journalists just had to sift through it. So you can't call him a journalist.
I can actually call him whatever I want. That's the wonderful thing about Speaker's Corner. And that's the wonderful thing about language. I can say that a man is a woman, or I could say that light is dark. These might be paradoxes, but you can say them. In the world of language, these words make sense. So I can call Julian Assange whatever I want. Now, if you want to call him a publisher or an editor, or if you want to call him a rapist or a turd or a misogynist, if that's what you want to call him, you can do that, by all means. I'm going to call him a journalist. Do you know why? Because he's won numerous prizes for journalism. He personally, and WikiLeaks as a body, numerous prizes for journalism from journalism institutions. So for me, that makes him a journalist. A journalist is anybody, in my opinion, who holds power to account by reporting the truth about the situation as they see it. That for me is what a journalist is. Incidentally, that is what a speaker at Speaker's Corner is. I believe in the ethical dimension of public speaking, that a good speaker is actually a good person. He's a good man, and he speaks the truth and he exposes lies. That's what a good speaker should do. That's for me the definition of a speaker. And in this case, Julian Assange has spoken the truth. And that's why when the state prosecutes Julian Assange, when the state and the media send their attack dog on Julian Assange, they're sending their attack dog on the truth, on free speech, which is a basic British value, is it not? free speech, as far as I understood, is one of the oldest values of this country. We were one of the first countries in the entire Western world to have a truly free press out from the grip of the state, at least in theory. In practice, a little bit more complicated than that, but that's another story. When a state is violating the values of a people, ought not that people rise against? At least in mind and spirit. Even if any of you, and even if I can't do anything about this situation, ought we not to at least resist in mind and spirit? And in fact, is that not the basis of real action? When you resist in mind and spirit falsehood, the shadows of unreason, as you might poetically call them, you have to start by resisting it intellectually and spiritually, and then maybe it might translate into action. That's what I feel. So if you don't want to call Julian Assange a journalist, I'm not going to stop you. But I believe he is a journalist. I believe he's a truth seeker, and he's not just a stenographer. He's not just copying out what the elites say and regurgitating it back to the public as if it's the truth. That is not what he's doing, I don't believe. So.
Did he ever criticize Israel?
Did he ever criticize Israel? I would not be surprised if WikiLeaks revealed some leaks from the Israeli government. I would not be surprised in the slightest. They've revealed information about most of the world's powerful states.
Do you know of any of these?
No, not personally, I don't know. But if you go onto the WikiLeaks website and you type in Israel, you'll get a list of results relating to Israel in particular. Either from the Israeli government or maybe from...
But he hasn't given out any leaks. So, would you say some journalists can be biased?
According to this man with the phone, according to Mr. Google, he's released 49 pages of...
Secret Israeli database shows full extent of Israeli settlements, 2009. Arab Light boycott of Israel. Background Argentina political and economic relations with Israel. Germany's relationships with Israel. Background and implications for German Middle East policy. It just goes on and on.
Can I just bring this up? It's related to what you just said.
But is this what Julian
People
Assange
say
has
that
brought up?
Julian Assange is a Russian agent. People say that Julian Assange is coordinated with Moscow to time his release of Hillary Clinton's emails to disrupt the American elections. That, for me, is absurd. Not only is there no evidence that Julian Assange has done that, it makes no sense why he would collaborate with Russia or why Russia would want to collaborate with him. Because WikiLeaks has also revealed plenty of documents about Russia. So anyone who says that WikiLeaks is a hostile foreign non-state intelligence agency, they've got to take that into account, that WikiLeaks has revealed information about Russia. It's revealed information about Israel. All countries, Britain especially. The United Kingdom, for many years, has been denying the right of a group of islanders to return back to their islands. The Chagos Islands, namely, in the Indian Ocean. WikiLeaks, with Julian Assange at the helm, revealed that to us, or he helped to reveal more information about that. There are some Catholics at Speaker's Corner. They would be interested to know that thanks to WikiLeaks, we now have a very interesting contradiction playing out at the heart of the Catholic Church. Pope Francis wrote a letter to the Sovereign Order of the Knights of Malta. The Sovereign Order of the Knights of Malta are a sovereign order. They're not allowed to be told what to do by the Pope. They're a body within the Catholic Church, but they're not allowed to be told what to do by the Pope. They are sovereign. And yet some of these people were Freemasons. Some of these people were spending their money, their funds, on contraception devices. Now, the Pope wrote a very stern letter to them to tell them, you're Catholic, you can't be a Freemason. You're Catholic and you can't be selling contraception or distributing contraception. Thanks to this revelation, this leaked letter from Pope Francis, thanks to WikiLeaks leaking this very important document, we now have a contradiction at the heart of the Catholic Church laid bare. The Church, it has to enforce its rules. It has to enforce its rules. But which rules does it enforce? Enforcing one rule violates the other one. If you impinge on the sovereignty of a body like the Sovereign Order of the Knights of Malta, you're violating Catholic doctrine. You're violating the rule that a sovereign body does not receive direction from the Pope. However, this body is misbehaving. It's not behaving in a Catholic way. It's distributing contraception. So you've got to do something, right? Now, I'm not a Catholic, but I find that interesting. That's a relatively small, minor problem in the world, but it's still very it's still very interesting. The much more notable thing that Julian Assange helped to reveal was the collateral murder tape. The collateral murder tape shows an American helicopter shooting down 2 Reuters journalists in Iraq, and also shooting at their children as well. One of them was a cameraman, and he had his children with him, just so happened to. And the helicopter shot those kids and injured them. The cameraman said, "Nice," or the helicopter man shooting them down said, "Nice." You see that in the video. You can hear them speaking, the American soldiers. We should know that, shouldn't we? Shouldn't we know that that's what's going on in the Middle East? That we have soldiers there saying those things and doing those things? That's important information.
It's a perfect world. It's a flawed society. Out of kilter.
So how on earth, so you can tell by my hat where I'm from, right? You can tell by
From
my
Lapland.
suit that I'm not a hippie, right? And yet, here I am in London, and they've taken Julian Assange, and he releases all sorts of damaging information about every country, and every country lets him get away with it, and then he releases damaging information about America, and suddenly there's a whole hoopla, but then suddenly there are 2 women who accuse him of rape. And this is what I don't understand. At the time, okay, rape is a bad thing. We have to do something about this rape. He should be in prison. If he's a rapist, he let power go to his head. But then, now, several years later, I see the rape charges have been dropped. I'm sorry, who drops rape charges? It was inconvenient to begin with, but now they've dropped them. And they've dropped him, and he's been in the Ecuadorian embassy for years, and now they let him go, and the British government arrests him for skipping bail on charges that have been dropped.
Not charges. Excuse me, my friend,
Oh,
not
okay,
charges.
sorry.
Allegations. Let's make that clear, allegations. Allegations that he's denied, not charges. He hasn't been charged with anything. Now, I am all for people facing justice. If they've been accused or there's been allegations brought to them of being a rapist, they should come and talk about that. Let's also clarify our terms here, because Sweden uses a specific definition of rape which the United Kingdom does not use, which Australia does not use, and which America does not use. What the Swedes call rape, we might in this situation call sexual assault. Julian Assange was accused of having sex consensually, with consent of the sex partner. But he didn't use a condom. And apparently the sex partner had no idea about that. So, let's also clarify what we mean by the terms. Yes, it's very interesting, isn't it? That Julian Assange is allowed to do what he does. WikiLeaks is allowed to do what it does. When it's talking about Kenya. When it's talking about Russia. Relatively minor players in this game. This game of geo-strategy. It's when he turns his attention to the United States. And I think this reveals a deeper truth about Western civilization. Western civilization has a very dark side to it. But typically speaking, Western leaders will not emphasize that side. This is quite an obvious point. I think we all know this. Societies generally don't encourage criticism of themselves. So, for example, in a history of the Cold War, we will hear many examples of abuses by the Russian government to third world countries. And its own people, no less. Millions dead because of starvation. Millions dead in war. However, Western civilization and its history books will not tell you so much about the American attempts to control Latin America, for example, through ousting progressive leaders like Salvador Allende and replacing them with regressive leaders like General Pinochet.
Yes, they are. We all know about that.
We all know about that, but that won't factor into the balance sheet overall. Overall, the West is best
That's true.
and the rest are
Bunch of communists.
Pinochet, that's reaching a little back far in history, though. We have to come up with more
Let's go to
recent-
something more recent, shall we?
Yes.
Let's go to something more recent. The same media that are persecuting Julian Assange are also the same media which have not brought to light a very important report written by a very respected think tank, a very important think tank, namely the Center for Economic and Policy Research.
Funded by who? Come on.
Whoever it's funded by, we should at least publish this report. When you have a Nobel Prize winning economist on your board of directors, that makes you a respected body, in my opinion. That in addition to producing lots of reports on world affairs. This report, what did it say? What did this report have to tell us about the world and how it really works? How Western power really works? This report came out and said that Trump's sanctions since 2017 on the little nation of Venezuela have killed more than 40,000 Venezuelans by denying them access to medical care, medical treatments.
So it's not
materials.
the communist dictatorship that stole
So you
their
are
oil
allowed
and used
to-
it to support their own military and stuff like that. It's the American government. See, my hat's revealing my bias against this.
I'm not here to say that the West is bad or America is bad. All I'm here to
Sounds
say
like
is
you
that
are.
that is a testament, I think, to the nature of our society. That when you try and bring up both sides to an argument, even trying to show both sides to a situation is seen as intolerable. Or not as intolerable, but uncomfortable.
No, but we can all agree that we should know.
Why whenever
you
you
can
like
agree with
question
government for
or
this.
criticise your own government, people they always get defensive. When isn't that the point of democracy is criticising your government? Because we have power to change the actions of our government.
But
not
even
other
to be
governments.
able to criticize, you have to know what's going on. And that's
Yeah,
why I love
but like-
WikiLeaks, is whether you're on one side of the political spectrum or another side of the political spectrum, knowing is the basis. Imagine if he and I were arguing and we were both totally ignorant. We're both slightly knowledgeable about what we're talking about now. We're picking different sides, but at least we know. But in a world in which we don't know, it's impossible to have any progress at all.
I'm talking about like the guy who shouted like, "Oh, everything's bad. The world is bad." When you were bringing up the crimes of like the West, instead of like actually addressing him, he was like, "Oh, everything's bad. You should just get over it."
Interestingly, that's something you heard in totalitarian Russia. If you were a socialist dissident in Russia, when it was a totalitarian state, and if you were a socialist dissident criticizing the state of Russia, you were portrayed as anti-socialist, anti-Russian. That's very worrying. When I first started speaking at Speaker's Corner with a particular focus on British foreign policy, and I started criticizing British foreign policy in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Venezuela, etc., etc., people never said that I was being anti-British. People never said I was being anti-Western for trying to redress the other side of the story. For trying to show that it's not just that the West is best, and in fact the West is deeply hypocritical. No one said that I was being anti-Western. Until a couple of years ago, I noticed a slight change. I don't know what it was, and I'm wondering if maybe you can help me find out what it was. But I noticed a strange change in Speaker's Corner. Whenever I started to criticize the United States' policy on Iraq or on Venezuela, people started to call me anti-Western, anti-British. Something you would only hear in Iran today. Something you would only have heard in the Russia of this man's childhood.
Let me point out, I started the American criticism here since I arrived, so I get credit for criticizing America.
We should hold our own leaders to account, shouldn't we? Should we not focus more on doing that than criticizing other countries? It's very easy to criticize the crimes of a country far away. What's more of a challenge, because it's less apparent to us, are our own crimes here at home. By that I don't mean us, the people, because very often we're left in the dark, for a good reason as well. What I mean is the crimes of our leaders, our elected representatives. When the cameras are off them, when the cameras move their gaze away from these leaders, they're not so interested in human rights. You can read the parliamentary record itself and you can find this out. When Theresa May was denouncing Venezuela's government as undemocratic, remember, a democratically elected government as undemocratic, when she was doing that, the very same time she was supporting the Saudi Arabian massacres going on of children as young as these two right here in Yemen. She had no problem with that. She had no problem with that. Now, do I think Nicolas Maduro is a good guy? No, I do not. Do I think Juan Guaido is a good guy? No, definitely not. But pointing out the fact that Trump's sanctions have killed 40,000 Venezuelans does not make me a fan of Nicolas Maduro. It does not make me against Juan Guaido necessarily. Let's respect that. By pointing out the other side of the story, you are not agreeing with the enemy, the official enemy, Hugo Chavez, Saddam Hussein, Nicolas Maduro, the official enemy, Muammar Gaddafi. When you criticize the way our leaders treat those men, you are not supporting them. This should be obvious. This makes perfect sense. There's a name in Latin for this fallacy. I do not know the name of this word, because I don't remember the Latin word, but I know there's a name for this fallacy. By criticizing one side, you're not agreeing with the other side, necessarily. So when I say the West has committed a terrible record of crimes against humanity, and if I say very largely that British foreign policy is a story of one crime against humanity after another, I am not coming out to say that communist China is much better. I'm not coming out to say that little semi-socialist Venezuela is much better either. All I'm doing is trying to hold my own country to account. And what am I speaking to? Who am I speaking to today? How many people are here today having this discussion at Speaker's Corner? About 20 or 30 of you are gathered in front of me today. Now, if I managed to change some of your minds, or if I managed to at least get you thinking about it a little bit for a few minutes before you get along with your day, I will have begun to move a big mountain with a tiny toothpick. But that's what I think is worth doing. Because all of you, there's a ripple effect. When some of you go away and then you might research what's going on, and then you might tell your friends about it, that creates a ripple outwards, an exponential growth of knowledge. That's why I'm here at Speaker's Corner. That's why I believe things can change. And yes, this gentleman here says he might disagree with me on many issues. Let me tell you a little story. I was outside the embassy of Ecuador just after Julian Assange was taken. I happened to arrive just as they were taking him. I was with my brother, I was wheeling my bike, and I thought it was just going to be another normal day outside the embassy, doing a solidarity vigil. I thought it was going to be another normal day. But it was the day that the police were told to fetch Assange from out the embassy. And a policewoman told me to move on. She said, move on, cross the road, go the other side. We did. We went around the corner, went to lock up my bike. By the time I came back, Julian Assange had been taken out. And you can see the video online for yourself. He doesn't look good. Something that's been left out of the media narrative is his health problems. He has very severe teeth problems and a cold shoulder or frozen shoulder. He also, no surprise, has depression after being stuck in the same room for 7 years. These are things the media don't like to talk about. Instead, they make fun of him. They say, oh, Father Christmas has just been taken out of the embassy of Ecuador, or Leo Tolstoy has just been taken out of the embassy of Ecuador.
So what can normal British people do to stop their government from extraditing?
I'll finish my story. I'll get onto that, my friend. I won't answer that question. But I want to get to something you said about disagreement. The night before I went to the embassy, and the same day of the embassy extraction, I was chatting to a journalist from Breitbart. A woman who I disagree with on nearly everything. And I disagree with Breitbart on nearly everything. Breitbart is a far-right news organization. It says so itself, that it's far-right. I identify as a libertarian socialist. I'm on the very opposite end of the spectrum, politically speaking. But we were united, me and this journalist, in our concern for Julian Assange. We were united in protecting the raw materials of rational discourse. The food by which Speaker's Corner lives. And so, I say to you, whatever your beliefs, left, right, or center, try and have a look at Julian Assange's case in a sympathetic way. Try and look at two sides of the story. The mainstream media narrative and the independent media. Media Lens, John Pilger, Cold Type magazine. Have a look at these men and women, these journalists. Caitlin Johnson has written a fantastic mega article going through each and every single one of the criticisms of Julian Assange and answering them each by each. Even the very minor rumors that Julian Assange smeared poo on the walls of the embassy of Ecuador. She'll even deal with trivialities and rumors and falsehoods like that as well. So she's very thorough. I really recommend her work. But now, your question about extradition, what was that?
Well, what can British people, and I say British people because I'm a guest here, I have no role in influencing the British government, or is that my role? But what role can British people, what steps can they take to influence their government not to extradite him? Because extraditing him would be an embarrassment to Britain, but honestly it would be the beginning of a long embarrassment for the United States too. What's America going to do when he comes to America? They're going to throw him in jail? Well, we need political prisoners in the United States now? Haven't we moved past that?
It's very worrying, the precedent set by this. Because basically, WikiLeaks is not that much different from the New York Times. Basically, it's not that different. And if you're going to attack Julian Assange in this way, and WikiLeaks in this way, you're going to set a precedent which might apply to the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, our Financial Times, our Guardian, at least in theory. So that's very worrying. Now, what can you all do? This is the question, basically. This was Lenin's great question in 1916. What is to be done? What is to be done? You are all adults. You can direct your own lives and decide what you think you can do. We all have our own individual personalities and our skills and our talents and our temperaments, which we bring to the table when we decide to step out of the private sphere and into the public sphere to deal with matters of shared concern. We all have our own individual, unique life histories and memories. And so for me to tell you what I think you should all do, beyond just the simple act of reading an article in the newspaper or reading Cold Type Magazine's article or series of articles entitled The Trials of Julian Assange, for me to tell you to do anything more than that would be ignorant, because I don't know your lives, and you're all adults and you can decide for yourselves what to do. There are many great organizations out there. In America, you have Democracy Now!, fantastic news organization. By literally just watching that news organization, you are supporting it. If you go further and you donate a couple of dollars every month to that news organization, you're helping it. If you go on the Twitter page for the Defend Assange campaign and you have a look at their side of the story, you are helping Assange. Even if you end up disagreeing with Assange and you decide he is a crook and a rapist, at least having a look at the other side is helpful. So that is a start. Staying informed. Staying informed. I have a Muslim friend at Speaker's Corner who tells me that in Islam there is a doctrine about evil. That if you cannot do anything about evil, you should at least speak about the evil. And if you cannot speak out against the evil, you should at least think about it.
A higher power is dragging me away, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my friend. See you.
Right, the Gilets jaunes in France have been totally ignored by the mainstream media. We do not hear a single thing on the BBC or ITV or anyone about the Gilets jaunes protests in France. Macron's thugs are beating them black and blue.
Gilets jaunes bad, Venezuelan protests good. Gilets jaunes protests bad, Venezuelan protests good. It's okay if you're attacking an enemy of the United States. It's not okay when you're attacking one of its friends. No. When you attack Emmanuel Macron, a very staunch friend of big business and Western elite power, when you attack him, that's a no. You're not going to get sympathetic coverage in the mainstream media. You're not going to get much coverage, actually, at all, really, in proportion to the problem. But if you're in Venezuela and you're attacking the democratically elected leader of Venezuela, then we'll give you space to give your point of view. Then we'll side with you, give you favorable opinion pieces, and so on and so on. That's the moral of the story. When Theresa May criticizes Nicolas Maduro, as she should on some points, Nicolas Maduro is not a good leader in many ways. When she criticizes him, the media is not allowed to roll on the floor laughing. which it should do. Theresa May is backing one of the worst war crimes happening in the world today. According to the United Nations, the most grave humanitarian crisis facing us at the moment. Namely, the crisis in Yemen. Theresa May is actively fueling this crisis by failing to hold Saudi Arabia to account, by failing to stymie the flow of arms to Saudi Arabia from the United Kingdom, and just by routinely failing to investigate the crimes at all. So, the media should be rolling on its face laughing. The media should be ridiculing Theresa May, but they're not. If you want to find out the reasons why the media behave in this way, I recommend to you the wonderful work of Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman. Noam Chomsky collaborated with a business lecturer at a university in America called Edward Herman in the 1970s to write a book called Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media. And this book, more than any other book I've ever read, has enlightened me as to how the media really work, how journalists really do their work, how newspapers really function, how broadcasters really work. There are 5 major filters on the media, according to Chomsky and Herman. There are 5 major filters. Let me give you the summary, and you can make of it what you will. 5 filters that decide what stays in the narrative and what stays out. The first filter is ownership. The media tends to be owned by very, very wealthy men. Billionaire tycoons. Tends to be. It tends to be owned by other companies. And naturally, those companies do not want to have their interests jeopardized by their own newspaper. That makes sense, surely. Rupert Murdoch, for example, is going to use his newspapers to get his point of view across. His very particular mix of extreme right-wing republicanism, I mean American republicanism, and extreme right-wing Thatcherism from Britain. He's going to use his newspapers to get that across. One of his editors even said as such, that that's what he would do. So that's ownership, that's number one. The second important filter is advertising. The Guardian, I believe, relies for 75% of its revenue on advertising, on corporate advertising. And I've seen, more times than I care to remember, one side of the Guardian's newspaper speaking about the serious issue of climate change, and on the very direct opposite side of the newspaper, running an advertisement from British Airways, telling you that not only will you have a cheap flight to get to Morocco, we will pick you up when you get there and drive you to your hotel. Do you see the contradiction? I think all of us see it pretty clearly, no? That's the Guardian. They cannot jeopardize their funding by criticizing British Airways, by saying maybe we shouldn't be taking so many flights, especially to Morocco. It's a long way away. Maybe we shouldn't be taking so many flights.
Play ball in order to survive.
But remember, the Guardian is a business. It sells you to advertisers. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, 75% of its advertising, of its money is from advertising. So really, they're in the business of selling you to advertisers, selling an audience to a company that needs an audience for its material. So I've spoken about ownership and I've spoken about advertising. What's the third one? The third one is very interesting. In the case of the BBC, which doesn't rely on advertising and is not owned by billionaire tycoons. The third one is sources. Sources. Journalists need stories. True? Journalists need lots of stories. Lots of stories. It's like having a human body without blood. They need lots of stories continually. They need to put their correspondents in locations where they know they will get stories. They cannot chase up every demonstration by every popular movement. They will tend to place their correspondents outside the White House, outside Whitehall, outside Buckingham Palace. These are the places they know they will get stories. Now, do they want to jeopardize that source of information? No, they don't. Do they want to criticize David Cameron too much? No, because they want to get access to David Cameron so they can get his stories, so he can give them exclusives. So yes, you can have a debate all you want about Brexit, a relatively minor issue in my humble opinion. You can have a debate all you want about that. The mainstream politicians don't mind, they will continue to give you stories. But if you start to ask questions about Trident, our so-called nuclear deterrent, if you ask questions about Julian Assange, if you ask questions about climate change and why it is so damn hot this time of year when it shouldn't be, then they won't be so ready to give you those stories. They won't be so ready to give you that access, which is what journalists rely on more than anything else. The BBC is a good example of this. The BBC doesn't rely on billionaire owners, and it doesn't rely on advertising, but it heavily relies on its sources in government. And it will very often reflect the will of the party of the day. So there was a very interesting study at Cardiff University which showed that the BBC, more than any other news outlet, beat the drum for the Iraq War. More than ITV and more than Channel 4. The BBC was giving supportive coverage of the argument for invading that poor country. So I'm not going to speak anymore about the last two. The last two filters are anti-communist diatribe, or in today's language would be anti-terrorist language. The other filter is flack, when the media receive flack from big business when it tries to criticize big business too much. I'm not going to go into detail about that. You can find that out for yourself. Read Chomsky's work for free online. Or if you're not someone who likes to read books, watch his videos. That's how I got into Noam Chomsky's work. I watch YouTube videos. I went on holiday and I didn't have much to do because it was quite rainy, and I just sat and I watched YouTube videos of Chomsky speaking. And he's not a great speaker, but he's got a lot of good things to say.
Why is the anti-communist diatribe feel like its own filter?
Well, during the Cold War, there was a anti-communist ideology which portrayed any enemy of the United States as a friend of communism. And that automatically dismissed any friend of communism as a bad regime to live under. So for example, you had Salvador Allende in Chile, who himself personally was a Marxist, but wasn't receiving any support from the Soviet Union, who wanted to bring in social democratic reforms to Chile to redress the land question which had been plaguing that country ever since the colonial days of the Spanish Empire. But Salvador Allende was denounced as a communist. You even see this today a little bit with Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is a middle-of-the-road social democrat. He would have very easily found a place at home in Winston Churchill's government. He values trade unions. Winston Churchill said that trade unions are a pillar of the establishment. Jeremy Corbyn values strong national services. Winston Churchill doesn't get enough credit for laying the groundwork for the NHS by not actively opposing it that much as he could have done it. These are things that Jeremy Corbyn values. On foreign policy, they completely disagree, of course. The point is that Jeremy Corbyn would have found a place at home in Winston Churchill's government, in Clement Attlee's government, in Harold Macmillan's government. He's not a radical figure. But because we've moved so far to the right wing in terms of our economic system, because we've moved so far towards individualism, self-reliance, market forces, and moved away from state intervention to help the public, i.e. welfare, people like Jeremy Corbyn are portrayed as communists, as Marxists, when he's not a Marxist.
So the media is like flawed and heavily. And then how do you fix it?
You know what? You don't have to fix it. You can read the alternative media. Try and read the mainstream media, and also try and read other newspapers as well. Don't just read the Times and the Telegraph.
Yeah,
try and read the Morning Star, for example. That's one way to fix the problem.
But people are going to watch like what's on TV. You know, they're going to watch like 10 o'clock news. They're going to read the papers out in the newsstands. They're going to read what's in the Facebook feed. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So, like,
But they're not only going to read that. People don't just read what's at the newsstand. People don't just read what's on their Facebook feed. People also actively seek out other sources of news. And I've given you 3 examples to start with. John Pilger's website. John Pilger is the best political journalist in the world at the moment. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. He really is. John Pilger's website is a good place to start.
Can you name
Media Lens is a good organization to read as well.
How is Media Lens funded?
Media Lens is funded by donations.
Okay.
So a lot of the independent media, they get their money from donations. They don't get their money from big business through advertising, and they don't get their money from the state. They get it through either working part-time, and I think that's the best way. If you want to be a journalist, you could change the problem yourself, my friend. Become a journalist, but don't get paid to do it. Don't do it for money.
Okay, but
Just do it for its own sake. That's really a delightful activity, doing something for its own sake.
if media is funded by donations, then aren't they beholden to those to the type of people who donate to them?
Of course, yes.
Are they going to get their content?
Of course. There's no such thing as a non-biased media. But at least let's proclaim our biases openly. Let's not pretend that the BBC is a neutral, transparent body, when it's not.
Yeah,
The BBC, the government has the BBC by both its balls, literally. It appoints the Director General of the BBC, and it sets the license fee that the BBC gets. So it decides how much money the BBC gets. So the government has the BBC by both its balls. You just straight away know that. Whenever someone tells you the BBC is a non-biased body, just remember those facts. Anything but. All of us would do well to remember that. I forget that sometimes. And I'm watching the BBC, and I'm like, oh, this is great news. And I forget, actually, this was shaped in a certain way by social forces, which we would do well to have a look at, I think. So I'm going to take a break, but I just want to say thank you so much for all of you listening. I really appreciate you taking the time to ask questions, and I want to see this debate continue. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Well done.
Thank you. Cheers, man.
You know your subject, obviously.
It's the most important thing.
Take heart. In these days of mass communication, all this.
Come take over everything from your government.
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen.
Sorry, let me comment. Brother, sorry for brother.
Let me help you to solve the Bible. Really, all I can say is God was allowing them to destroy their enemies. Rob, that's the only logical way I can. No problem. So, Rob, according to you, the babies are enemies.